Welcome to Ignatius Press Off the Shelf. Vivian Dudro, Joseph Pearce, and I, Father Fessio, have just concluded the discussion of a wonderful book, G.K. Chesterton's Everlasting Man. Now we move to a different genre, novel by a German woman novelist who really deserves more to be known in this country. And we're going to turn this over to, both Joseph and Vivian are literary experts and experts on literature by far compared to me. But in this case, I think Vivian is the right person to lead this discussion. So Vivian, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Father. Yes, I'm not an expert, but I'm a fan. So with that in mind, I'll move ahead. So I would first like to introduce people to Gertrude von Lefort herself, because many people don't know a lot about her. And she was born in 1876, the daughter of a German baron and military officer, a Protestant family. They were of Huguenot extraction.
Is that the same year as Chesterton?
18
No, 2 years later. She's 2 years younger than Chesterton.
Okay.
Oh, but what do you know? They were contemporaries.
Absolutely contemporary. So she lived much longer, but yes, they were
Yes.
contemporaries.
Yes. So her forebears were Huguenot Protestants who fled France during the persecution. And yes,
Huguenots are
a French Protestant sect.
right. After the Reformation or the Revolution, as someone want to call it, in France, you had Protestants who were Calvinists, I believe. No,
I think it was mostly a Calvinist sort of
Yeah.
theology.
But for some reason, they're called Huguenots.
Yeah, I don't know that reason. Do you, Joseph?
I don't know why they're called Huguenots. No, I
Okay.
don't know. They
But
were
in any
Calvinists.
case, the French crown decided to suppress them, and so many of them fled to Switzerland, where Calvin was from, and this family ended up migrating to Germany, where she was born, and an aristocratic military officer for a father. Okay, so she also was a baroness and highly educated for a woman of her time. She went to 3 different universities: Heidelberg, Marburg, and Berlin. She studied history and philosophy. And, right at the time when modern materialism was taking the universities by storm, right?
Well, as we discussed in the drama of atheist humanism, especially in Germany, that was where the secularization really took place. Okay.
Yes, yes. And she became a Catholic in 1926 at the age of 50. And I wish I knew more about what led to her conversion. Hopefully, we'll find out when we finally get that manuscript about her autobiographical writings, which we're hoping to translate into English soon. And then maybe we'll know more about this. In any case, she published more than 20 books of poetry, short stories, and novels, and most of these after her conversion, which is a little bit different from some Catholic authors who wrote great works and became Catholic later. And then a lot of literary critics say that their greatest work was before their conversion. Well, in this case, that cannot be said about her. Hermann Hesse was a great admirer of hers. He was a great 20th century German novelist, and he nominated her for the Nobel Prize in Literature. Her most famous work in the English-speaking world is the song at the Scaffold. And that became the reason why it's so famous is A, it's been translated into English for a long time, and B, it was the basis of George Bernanos's screenplay, The Dialogues of the Carmelites, which then was turned into an opera of the same name by Francis Poulenc. So this story in particular, which is set during the French Revolution, about the true story of the Carmelites of Compiègne who were martyred during the Reign of Terror, this is what put Gertrude von Lefort, I think, on the map here in this country.
And I saw a performance of that here in San Francisco years ago, where at the end, these Carmelites who were going to be executed in the French Revolution, with Blanche, who was the one who was afraid, but she's there at the end. She joins, I think, at the end, and they're singing the Te Deum as they walk up to the scaffold. And it's such a powerful ending that they walk up, they're singing the Te Deum, and then it's not quite as loud.
Yeah.
And then finally Blanche walks up singing the Te Deum, and it's gone. But It's a powerful story.
I'm glad you mentioned Blanche because Gertrude von Lefort's historical fiction, all of her fiction is what I would call historical fiction, in that she sets the story in some historical event. Many of the characters are true historical people, but she always invents a character or two in order to dramatize a story. And Blanche was her creation. But all the other sisters in that novel and went to the guillotine, they were the real nuns who gave up their lives for the
I would
end of.
say as well, I'm just being speculative here, thinking out loud, but I think one of the reasons probably that the song at the Scaffold has been more popular and was translated into English, whereas the Wedding of Magdeburg hasn't been until now, is that in the Anglophone world, the French Revolution is a big story, right? It
Mhm.
seems well known in all sorts of multifarious ways. Whereas the 30 Years' War, quite frankly, is such a confused, convoluted something that happened that nobody really understands, certainly in the English speaking world, that it wouldn't be of obvious immediate interest, right? So that's why it's probably put to one side. Even though it was the greatest work, it was not accessible to English speaking people.
Right, right.
Good point. Yeah.
Good point. Yes, and we've also Ignatius Press. We brought back into print the song at the Scaffold when it went out of print. Uh, we also have published some of her short stories, "The Wife of Pilate" and other stories, "The Innocents" and other stories. And to your point, Joseph, some of the historic episodes in these stories are not that well known. The court drama of the Holy Roman Emperor, this kind of thing. And then other stories like the fire bombings of the Second World War, that we are more familiar with. The Wife of Pilate from the Gospels. So I encourage people to delve into these stories, even if they don't know a lot about the historical episode, because the themes that she keeps returning to are always the same themes. And that
It's
brings us,
also, Vivian, it's also a wonderful way to actually learn the history.
yes,
I mean, how many of us are going to sit down and read a 500-page academic historical book about 30 Years' War? A, we're probably not interested enough. And even if we are, that's going to be hard work and complicated.
yes,
Whereas picking up
And
a novel,
it is a very, very important historical event, the 30 Years' War, in European history, but it also affected our history.
yes, it did.
Uh, and as Americans, sorry, Joseph, I mean, you're an adopted American here, but we generally don't know as much about history as people in Europe, where they're living with these monuments and streets named after these figures. In France, there's no Second Avenue or Third Street or Fifth Street or High Street or Main Street. It's always, September the 7th Street, or, Boulevard Street or something like that. The history is just everywhere when you're in Europe. Whereas for us, it's always the future we're interested in. But because this really affects who we are and how we perceive the world, it's important for us to know more about European
of
history.
course.
And this is a good way to do it.
Yes,
Because,
Especially
like you,
if
Joseph,
the
I don't
if
wanna
the
read these
if the
big tomes on things, whereas
right.
here's dramatized. By the way, just a little side note on this, when I was a young Jesuit in the novitiate, we read these books by James Broderick, S.J., on different Jesuit saints, Ignatius, Francis Xavier, and so on, Bellarmine. But he had a marvelous way of setting the saint into the historical back. So I learned a lot about history because it reading lives of these saints. This
hmm
is this
Yeah,
is
I
similar
mean, yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. You have to be able to trust the historical novelist. In other words, the historical novelist has to be a servant of objectivity, even if they're taking liberties, if you like, poetic license, in order to tell the story. The story must not be a lie or a distortion or something which is just untrue because of ignorance or prejudice on the
Yes,
part of
and
the
that
novelist.
I'm particularly oversensitive, I guess, to that when people recommend a historical film, based on a true story, and then you love the movie and read the true story based on, you mean the name of the guy was the same, okay, but
well,
Exactly.
Well, the other thing about reading fiction in the first place, about living vicariously through other people's experiences, and then in a historical setting, now you're living that vicariously and learning about that historical setting. And one of the things that Lafort is doing in all of her stories, her main theme is looking at the metaphysical meaning of woman. And so, which is to say that it represents the relationship between God, the creator, and us, the creature. I mean, we're all female vis-a-vis God in the sense that God is the one who initiates and creates us, comes toward us, has a will, a mission for us, and we're the ones who receive his word, his will, hopefully, and carry it out, right? And so, um, her female characters and her male characters also in relation with the female characters, they are working out this struggle to hear what God is saying in the historical circumstance that they're in, and they're being invited to act, and they don't always listen and they don't always act, or if they act, they don't act the way in which they should. And so this is the theme in all of her stories. And so there's a great deal to learn, not only about history, but about yourself.
Oh, yeah, okay.
When you read her books, there's a lot you really like are put back in your seat and just have to think about what she just, you know, how does this apply to me is something that you do when you read her novels.
Can we learn about women?
As Chesterton
We need
says,
that, you know.
as Chesterton says, only a blackguard talks about women, but a good man talks about woman.
Okay. Well, I remember one of those Reader's Digest jokes years ago. There was an ad for a course on accounting for women, and someone said, "There's no accounting for women."
Very funny. But I wouldn't, having said this, I would not want any listener to think, oh, then it's just a girl story or a girly thing or a romance. I
It's
don't
a
know.
war story.
It's a war story.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to move into just what war are we talking about here? The 30 Years' War, as Joseph has already mentioned, which occurred between 1618 and 1648. And it began as a religious conflict between the Protestant states and the Catholic Holy Roman Empire. And the Magdeburg Wedding, which is the name of this novel, is the name of the sack of a German city by the Holy Roman Emperor's army in 1631. This city was a Protestant city that had been given its liberty to remain Protestant by the emperor previously. But the emperor then wanted the city to come back into the fold. He wanted the bishop to become Catholic again, the cathedral to become Catholic again. And he threatened to use force to impose this upon the city. And unfortunately, the city and the emperor and their emissaries going back and forth, as Czech beautifully says in his foreword here, Christopher Czech, they failed to see the good in each other. They failed to make peace terms. And the city, in order to resist the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor, decides to side with the invading Swedish army, thinking that the Swedish Protestant king, Augustus Adolphus, will protect them. And by the way, just so that you know that this isn't just Protestant versus Catholic, the king of Sweden, the Protestant king of Sweden, was being bankrolled by France.
Catholic
France. Cardinal Richelieu bankrolled the invading Swedish armies to run rampage through the Holy Roman Empire. Why? Because France and Spain, the Holy Roman Empire was run by the Habsburgs of Spain at this point, were rivals. And so, now you see just the blackened heart of.
Maybe say, the plus change. The more things change, the more they remain the same.
Yes.
If we remember the Battle of Lepanto, 1571, and Chesterton's poem about Lepanto, right? It's the reason that there's not that the Pope calls for Christian unity around the cross to fight the Muslim armada, and they're all busy fighting amongst themselves, and
Yes.
the French basically are on the side of the Muslims
Yes.
because they're opposed to the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yes.
So this is not, unfortunately, it's nothing new, right? This is secular politics perverting an understanding of what's good and what's evil.
Right.
And that was 1571, Battle of Lepanto.
Yeah.
So you can see it's just after the Protestant Reformation, just as this war was, the 30 Years' War, but precisely as it was taking place, you might call yourself a Catholic country, but your national interest overcame or supplanted your religious interests.
Yes, yes. And the tragedy is the city does fall to the Holy Roman Emperor's army, and 20,000 civilians out of 30,000 were killed. I mean, it was a total slaughter. Now, Lefort tells this story on 3 levels: the relationship of the city to the Holy Roman Empire, the relationship of a man and a woman about to be married, and the relationship of the soul to God. And the book is divided into 3 parts, which correspond to the 3 final steps the couple is taking before their
And
marriage.
who is this couple, and what do they represent, the man and the woman? I mean, because they're on different sides of this thing, right?
No, no, they're not. The man and woman are not on different sides. No, the man, we'll get into the characters later, but the man, the bridegroom, he is the emissary that the city is sending to the general of the Holy Roman Empire to try to broker a peace deal, okay? And the bride, as he goes off to try to fulfill this mission he's been given by the city to try to save the city, let's just say that the bride loses her patience.
Bridegroom.
The bride loses her patience
so-
as the
but-
groom goes to try to sue for peace.
Right. Okay.
Okay, but they're both patriotic Magdeburgers. Okay. So the book is divided into 3 parts, which happen to correspond to the 3 stages before the wedding takes place: the maiden's eve, the dance of honor, and the bridal chamber. And they match what is happening to the city in this battle. And what's so brilliant about all of this is that this battle, this siege, was already called the Wedding of Magdeburg. The meaning of this event was sort of already there for Gertrude von Lefort to mine, you know? She's not projecting a meaning onto something, she's seeing a meaning in something and then drawing it out by telling the story. Now, do we want to turn to Czech's forward while we have a few minutes left? Is Christopher Czech, who is the president of Catholic Answers, a big Gertrude von Lefort fan, by the way. He wrote the beautiful foreword for this, and
He's also a Chesterton fan, and
Yes.
famous for reciting the Battle of Lepanto from memory.
Yes.
Yes. And so he spells out on pages 8 and 9 what the 30 Years' War was all about. And he does mention that this story was written by Lefort during the Nazi rise to power in Germany. And he doesn't think that's just a coincidence. I love on page 10 where he says that the siege and destruction of Magdeburg must be the most infamous of the war, because it was. And in case anyone didn't know it, he underlines that. He explains the imperial edict. That was the 1629 decision of the Holy Roman Empire to say to the city, your license to be Protestant has expired.
Yeah.
And if you don't go along with that,
Can I backtrack a bit here? Because I just want to check. Just want to check some dates here. Because you said that the rise of the Nazis. I've actually just finished reading a wonderful book called History in My Time by Otto Strasser, which is the history of Central Europe from a German perspective between 1914 and 1933. So from the beginning of World War One to Hitler coming to power, that 20-year period. And if this was first by 1938, Hitler had actually been in power at this point for 5 years, and obviously on the brink of World War II. The following year, the Anschluss had already annexed Austria.
Well,
So
that happens
this
in
is
1938. But the year that something is published, that's after it's been written. So
yeah. So was it published many years after it was written? Then
no,
that's why I'm
but
asking.
no, we don't know how long she took to write it, but, um,
So
and maybe I
I'm not
missed.
contradicting anybody here. It's just I think it's important. There's a difference between, the spectre of the Nazis on the rise, which would be true of 1931, for instance, and 1938, when we've had the Third Reich in full militaristic
Yes, yes,
splendor, for 5 years at this point.
right, right. Well, I don't know how long she took to write it, but I think it's safe to say that, she certainly was a witness to the rise of the Nazis,
Yeah,
and,
but if I think it's even more dramatic if she's writing it to the backdrop of Nazi Germany,
yes,
that's actually her homeland is now being ruled by basically a demonic, a totalitarian regime. I mean, that's even more dramatic than the fact that there's the ominous specter of this thing that you wouldn't know. In 1931, you wouldn't know the Nazis were going to come to power. You
yes,
might think it's a possibility, but in 1938, they have come to
they
power.
have,
If anything, it's
yes.
much more dramatic.
Okay, we got just 10 minutes. So, the other quote that stood out to me was his one about Count Tilly, who was the general of the empire's army on page 10, um, because what he must be just some butcher of a man, right? To stand and watch 20,000 of 30,000 civilians slaughtered by the sword and by fire and so on. And as as Check points out, taking his cues from history, but also Lafort's treatment of Tilly. The last paragraph on page 10, Count Tilly's culpability for the war crime is in doubt. The Jesuit trained officer was a man of moral principle. Lafort is sympathetic. And he then says that toward the end of that paragraph that the mercenary mob gone out of control and the fire carry much of the blame. So, war is a horrible, brutal thing. This is not to put, you know, uh, some kind of veneer over the horror of 20,000 out of 30,000 people in the city being slaughtered. But what you'll see in the story is that Tilly also wanted peace with the city. And as the saying goes, it takes two to tango.
Yeah, and there's something absolutely horrific about the mob. In fact, one of the very few things that I disagree with Cheston about is he tends to romanticize the mob. But in actual fact, there are very few things more terrifying than a mob. Because once the mob is going, there is no stopping it. I mean,
That's
if you
right.
try to stop it, you just become a victim of it.
That's right. And these armies were filled with mercenaries. These men were not operating on religious principle or moral principle. They got paid to do what they did, and they got paid in loot. That's how they got paid.
Yeah,
So
booty. Yeah,
the
basically
booty.
the booty. Yeah.
Yep.
We will then enter into the text itself in the next session. And Vivian, you have divided this up into 4 sections. So the first section we'll take is part 1, which is pages 13 to 72 in this book,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So we will see you soon in a week. God bless you.